In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. You can't sit him up. He's doing Just get up! My God, get up!
When a man is arrested and charged with a murder, he tried to say that the devil made me do it. Sorry about that. Hello,
true crimerers.
This is the case of Alan Bono. Viewer discretion is advised. Let's get into It was February 16th, 1981. We are now in Danbury, Connecticut. Brookfield police officers are driving down a road where they see a man kind of just stumbling along the road. He had a little bit of blood on him, and when they get out of their car to look at the guy, he seems completely out of sorts, like he's just somewhere totally different. He isn't there mentally. So they put him into the car because he appears to be drunk to them, and he says to them, quote, "I need help because I've got a drinking problem," end quote. Well, it turns out just about an hour to 2 hours before this man was seen wandering on the road by police officers, he had stabbed someone. Not once, not twice, but 4 times. And by the time they put this together, the man he stabbed was dead. That man was named Alan Bono. But in order to understand what happens next, we have to rewind time a little bit and get some context here. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard about this case. This story was featured in a recent Conjuring movie, The Conjuring 3, The Devil Made Me Do It. And recently Netflix put out a documentary, like an hour-and-a-half long movie called The Devil on Trial. It's actually worth a watch. I watched it the other day in preparation for doing this video. It's a pretty interesting little documentary. The movie The Conjuring is also good. I like the Conjuring movies, but it should go without saying, but some people do need to hear this just in case. The Conjuring 3, or any Conjuring movie, very much over-embellishes exactly what happened, but they need to do that because it's a horror movie about ghosts and demons and stuff, so of course they need to make it scarier and bigger. But the reality of what actually happened is not that intense. The man that police found wandering the road that day in 1981 was a man named Arnie Cheyenne Johnson. Arnie was engaged to a woman named Debbie Glatzel, and Debbie Glatzel had a young brother named David. And about a year-ish or so before Arnie Johnson is arrested, a pretty bizarre event happened in the Glatzel home, specifically to David. David Glatzel was 11 years old at the time his incident started to occur. By the summer of 1980, David Glatzel, 11 years old, is beginning to tell people that he had gone to this well, I guess. And ever since he went to this well by their home, he said he would continually see a man, an older man, who would appear to him and start making fun of him and taunting him. And he was afraid of this man. At first, the family was like, who is this man you're talking about? They didn't really believe him. He's this 11-year-old kid. He's probably just maybe trying to get attention, that kind of thing. A lot of kids do that. But then his behavior, David's, began to escalate, I guess you can say. He would wake up in the middle of the night screaming, and he was just sweating profusely and saying that there was a big man in his room with big eyes, and he had these scary looking sharp teeth, and he looked ugly, and he was just he looked like a monster, but was still like a person. He had horns and he had hooves, and he would nickname this thing the Beast. It was tormenting David, and his behavior became more terrifying. His outward behavior became more terrifying to the family. He didn't seem like he was himself. Well, at some point, his mom calls in a priest to maybe just bless the home, because maybe there's a ghost here or something like that. But it doesn't work. David's behavior is still very erratic and very kind of concerning and scary. And he's still claiming to see these things, these entities, these people, this guy, this monster, this beast. And then they eventually get a hold of Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens are paranormal investigators, and those characters are the starring roles in the Conjuring series. Ed and Lorraine Warren were very, very real people. They existed in the way they are with their paranormal investigations. And Lorraine had these abilities, I guess you can say. They had become known over the years for like their works with like the Amityville house and the house that they had gone to for the first Conjuring movie. I'm blanking on the name of that family, but that was a real family too. The Glatzels, which were featured in the third Conjuring movie, very real family. I will say this as a side note, that another thing that the Conjuring 3 did is they completely just erased a couple members of the Glatzel family. So that's one sign to show you like how they weren't being very accurate with this. So I know they eliminated one of his brothers, Carl. I think they did that for a reason. David's older brother, who was, I think, 15 years old at the time this was all happening, he didn't believe any of this was actually happening. He didn't believe that anything paranormal was occurring. He just kind of looked at his family and like, what are you guys all doing? Because the family seemed to all be on board with this fact that eventually David Glatzel was possessed by a demon. And David Glatzel he would spit at people, he would scream and cuss, and his behavior became more vulgar over the course of time. But it's only when Ed and Lorraine Warren became involved in this story when they said kind of out loud the things you could expect from a demon possessing someone, like, oh, you might start to hear him say a lot of bad words and become violent and spit on people, maybe try to hit people. It wasn't until then when David began to show those signs. He began to cuss, and he was very vulgar to his family, and he would growl, and he would look scary, and he would basically swat at people, try to hit people, he would spit at people. At one point, it looked like he was being strangled by someone. He was like trying to hold someone back, but that wasn't there. But it seems like David Glatzel, at least to the brother, Carl, that David was hearing what was expected of him to do in a demon possession, and so he began to demonstrate those things after he heard them. But David kept going. He said that he now is seeing an old man with a white beard, and the family said they started to hear strange noises coming from around the house. And power of suggestion, by the way, is a hell of a thing. Now, I want to be clear about something. I do believe in like ghosts and the supernatural and all that, but I have a hard time with this whole demon possession thing. But anyway, the family would begin to hear noises, and so they were becoming more and more, they were believing this more and more as it was an actual paranormal event. David began to start speaking in this like gravelly, scary voice, almost like a demon would sound. He was having seizures. He was hissing at people. Like, it was just very scary behavior. But was this an actual issue going on with him? Maybe not demon possession, but some kind of medical issue, like a mental health issue. Or was this him just simply trying to get attention? Well, Ed and Lorraine Warren said that this was absolutely a demon possession. He was possessed by a demon. There were multiple demons using him. And eventually they work with the Catholic Church, and they get the approval to have an exorcism done. So what I'm about to play for you is like a minute and a half long or so of audio. And this is an audio from the exorcism of David Glatzel. This is the actual audio. So this has not been doctored or anything like that. This is what actually occurred, and you are hearing the exact thing that happened. It's not all that disturbing, but some of you may find it kind of disturbing, so I just want to give you a heads up. But here is that audio clip.
David, in the name of Jesus, Jesus repels you. Leave this child alone. It's on your forehead. Yes, Never, you are not strong, you're weak. You're weak. Ryan. Jesus loves this boy. This is his child.
Wake him out of it. Strap him up. Do something. You won't get out of it right now, Ma.
He told me that he's going to do nothing now.
What do you think he's been doing all
In
this
the
time?
Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. You got to hold him down. He told me to. Hold him on the ground, he said.
David, Mommy's here. Mommy's here. Come on, wake up. Come on. Get up. Come on, let's go. Get out of this. Get out of my son. Get out of my son. Come on. Come on, son. Son, get up. Get away from my son. No! I'm your mother. David, wake up.
The
Get up.
oil.
Get up, David. Use the Holy Mommy loves you. Mommy
In
loves
the
you.
Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. You can't sit him up. He's
Just get up! My God, get up!
Ed and Lorraine Warren, and I think a couple of his family members, would say that because they actually would end up performing, I think, 2 or maybe 3 exorcisms on David. I think only one of them was done by actual priests, though. But they said David, he lifted off the ground. He was floating in the air. His body contorted in ways that a human body can't. And you can see images from the movie, The Conjuring 3, that I'm probably showing here, of him folding up and bending around like a pretzel. And that's what they said happened. That his physical features changed. He got boils on his skin. He was cursing at everyone. He was screaming and yelling, and he was just terrifying. During one of the final exorcisms, Arnie Cheyenne Jackson, who again was engaged to David's sister Debbie, he was basically at the house all the time. I mean, he was front and center to all of this happening. He was a big part of it. He was always there at the exorcisms. He was helping the family any way he could. Well, during one of the final exorcisms, Arnie Johnson began to taunt the demon that was allegedly in David. He was basically calling this demon out, like, hey, he would say to him, quote, "Take me on, leave my little buddy alone," end quote. He kept suggesting that this demon leave David and enter him. And then sort of suddenly, kind of after that, the demon seemed to be gone from David. And everything kind of went back to normal as you could get in this situation. And then Arnie and Debbie would kind of start to go on with their lives. Now, many years later, one of the brothers, Carl, whose character was not in the Conjuring movie, he would again say, like I said earlier, that all of this was a bunch of baloney. It was hogwash. It wasn't real. None of this was actually true. He believes, like psychologists believe, that David was experiencing some sort of mental health issue, an undiagnosed mental health issue. He had learning disabilities that they were aware of, but he wasn't being treated by anyone with regards to this in terms of being like professionally treated by like a psychiatrist. Years later, when their mother died, Carl found some diaries that his mother wrote. And in those diaries, one of the quotes he saw was, "Gave the family their medicine tonight and all should be calm," or something like that. He found out that his mom was putting a sleeping medication in the family's food. Or I should say he suspected at that point that his mom was putting a sleeping medication in all the family's food. And that she had been doing this for a very long time. And this particular sleeping medication, when taken in this way for that long of a period of time, can actually cause a person to have hallucinations and can cause other medical issues. And Carl thinks that that's one of the things that was going on with David. He was probably having hallucinations as a reaction to this sleeping medication. Carl would also say that the family did not really ever go to church until after David became mysteriously possessed by a demon. His mom was basically putting on a show to get religion involved to make it look like this was actually happening to David. It's almost as if David was this impressionable 11-year-old kid who kind of heard the things he was supposed to be doing, and I'm getting all this attention now. Mom's bringing in like priests and stuff. This is cool. It's kind of like, was he making it up? Or was it actually happening? I'm not one to sit here and say whether or not it happened because I wasn't there. I wasn't involved. I can only speak the story as I've heard it. You have a lot of the family who believes this genuinely happened, and then you have some other family who believes that this was all a bunch of bullshit. Now at this point, Arnie Johnson, allegedly, he had gone to this well that David had gone to just before David became possessed. And Ed and Lorraine Warren warned Arnie Johnson to not go towards that well because that's probably where this demon came from. And you shouldn't do that, especially after you, Arnie, taunted this demon. So Arnie and Debbie, they were friends with a man named Alan Bono. Alan Bono was born on February 21st, 1940. Alan, I guess, had lived a big portion of his life all the way in Australia, and then he had moved to Brookfield, Connecticut at some point, and he opened up a boarding kennel for dogs. I think it was Debbie, I believe, worked at the kennels, and Arnie had a different job. But that's kind of how the three of them all knew each other, and they were friends and they would hang out all the time. On the evening of February 16th, 1981, that is when Arnie Johnson is found walking on the side of the road in this state of like shock, or he's out of it. He's in a different place mentally, got a little bit of blood on him. That's when he is kind of brought in initially just because he appeared to be drunk, but then they found out what happened. And what happened was that a few hours prior to him being found on the road, there had been allegedly a very big argument between Arnie Johnson and Alan Bono. There are a couple of different stories about what happened, one of them being that both Arnie and Alan were incredibly intoxicated. They had been drinking since the afternoon. They had just gotten into some kind of fight, and something happened where Arnie took out a pocket knife and he stabbed Alan numerous times in his chest. Another story is that, one, they were drunk in the story too, but that Alan was seen with Debbie, I guess, looked at it as if he was trying to make advances towards Debbie, and that the fight started because Arnie believed that Alan was trying to get involved with his fiancée, Debbie. But what Arnie says is that he doesn't know what happened. He says that when the police found him on the side of the road, he doesn't really know how he got there, and he doesn't remember at all what happened. And this is when Arnie basically says, I think the reason why I did this is that the devil made me do it. The claim is that Arnie taunted the demon that was possessing David, and he taunted him a couple of times, and that once David was exorcised of this demon, the demon came out and somehow latched on to Arnie, and going to this well where the demon originally came from somehow, I don't even know. Like, it just, I don't know. And so Arnie Johnson is charged with the murder of Alan Bono. But Arnie's like, well, I didn't do it. A demon did it. A demon stabbed him. It wasn't me. A demon was in my body and made me do this. And pretty much no attorney was going to even touch that shit. They're like, okay, no, we're not going to do that. But one attorney finally did. This attorney decided to go to the courtroom and say, when they asked him, well, how is he pleading? And he says Arnie Johnson will be pleading not guilty by demonic possession. That the reason was demonic possession. Not insanity, not anything like that. Not guilty by reason of demonic possession. Something that had never been done in the United States ever before. When this happened, it had been done, I think, 3 or 4 times over in England, where they actually used the demonic possession as an actual plea. And it worked, actually, a couple of times. The courts found those people not guilty on a couple of occasions by reason of demonic possession. And so this became very quickly known as the devil made me do it case. And this is when Ed and Lorraine Warren, they re-enter the story and they confirm, they say, listen, Arnie was possessed by a demon. He taunted the demon and the demon took over him and it caused him to do this horrible thing. And this created a lot of animosity towards the Warrens in the local media, especially with regards to like the lawyers, like prosecutors and the police specifically, that they were called nothing more than a vaudeville act. It was a good act, but it was all just an act. It also happened to be coinciding with the fact that the Warrens were going to be writing a book about this case. And so, hey, money, money, money. And they were like, listen, we can prove to you, we have the audio of these exorcisms. We can show you the photos because there are, and some of the photos I showed earlier with regards to the exorcism, or the actual photos of David Glatzel's exorcism, he appeared like a normal looking kid who was just like fighting, you know, like he wasn't contorted, he didn't have boils on his face or anything like that. He just looked like a sweaty little kid who was being held down. But they said that these are images to prove that he was possessed. We have the audio, we have priests who can testify of what they saw. One of the other pieces of evidence that they said proved this demonic possession thing was that at the crime scene, there really wasn't any blood. His shirts didn't have any rips or tears like Alan Bono's shirt. And somehow they said, oh, that supports demonic possession. I don't understand how, but that's, I guess. And so they were fully prepared to make this a case about the devil. But the judge, Robert Callahan, when he heard the plea, he looked, you know, he did some, I guess, soul searching of his own and decided that he would not allow a plea of not guilty by reason of demonic possession, that it was not going to be allowed in his courtroom. And he said that it was, quote, impossible to prove, and that any testimony on the matter would be unscientific and therefore irrelevant, end quote. There is something that someone said with regards to this case that I agree with, that when you are in a court of law, God is a part of it, right? They say, do you swear to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? You swear on a Bible in most cases. So they allow religion in the courtroom, they allow God to be present in the courtroom. And so why can't you therefore say, why can't the devil be in there, right? Like, why can't you argue the devil made me do it? As insane as it sounds, I know, but why can't you argue that if you are also allowed to bring God into the courtroom? Why do you get to pick and choose? Because to me, that's suggesting that they don't believe in, they're saying there's no scientific basis, therefore you cannot prove the devil exists and these demons exist. But if you are godly, right, you do believe in the devil and you do believe in this stuff. So it's confusing. And I understand why Arnie Johnson and his attorneys were like, well, what do we do then? Because I can't say why this happened in court now. I can't say that I was possessed by a demon. Again, as wild as that sounds, he should have been allowed to say it. He should have been allowed to argue it. But in the end, he wasn't. And so his attorneys, they had to resort to something. I don't know why his attorneys didn't then just go to, we're pleading not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. Why didn't they do that? But instead, they ended up going not guilty by reason of self-defense, stating that there was a fight that broke out between Arnie and Alan. Alan was punching or whatever the case may be, and so Arnie just took out a knife and instinctively stabbed him. But then the other problem is if it's self-defense, you can understand one stab. You could probably even understand two. But then third and fourth stab, the more stabs you do, the less self-defense it is. But that's what they go to trial with, is they're going to be doing this off of self-defense. Debbie said that she believed that this was demonic possession, that he went into this psychosis because of this demonic possession, and that's what led to the murder. Alan can't speak for himself. He can't say what happened because he's no longer with us. There was testimony about how Arnie was just drunk that day, Alan was drunk that day. There had been this kind of history of like Alan trying to pick up on Debbie, flirting with her, and that sometimes Arnie can get a little crazy when he's drunk. That at times he could be very aggressive when he's drunk. They end up going to trial, and Arnie is found guilty, and he is found guilty of basically a manslaughter charge. He is sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison, but based on time served and also good behavior, Arnie Johnson was released after serving 5 years in prison. When he was serving that 5 years in prison, he and Debbie actually ended up getting married, and the two of them stayed married until Debbie's unfortunate passing, and all the way up until her death, she swore that this was definitely a case of demonic possession. She actually said that Arnie never should have challenged the beast in David. He never should have taunted the beast. And that's what led to this unfortunate thing. Ed and Lorraine Warren would go on to make a lot of money off of their book, in which the Glatzel family only got a tiny itty bitty fraction of the money, while the Warrens got a boatload of money from the book sales about what happened to the Glatzel family. The Warrens are polarizing, I guess you can say. A lot of people believe that they were nothing more than a circus act, so to speak, and a lot of people believe that they were the real deal. But the timing behind all of this, it does sound like whatever they said is what led to David's behavior. So he listened to what they said, and then his behavior altered to do that. Arnie Johnson was present during all of this. And they told him, don't taunt him, don't taunt the beast. And so he does anyway. So is that because he was so involved in all of this, and because there was this theory they had that he could get possessed by the beast now because he taunted it, did he just use that as an excuse for what he did? I'll leave that up for you to decide. But he is out and about. He actually was interviewed for the Netflix documentary, as was David Glatzel and some other family members. It's an interesting documentary. I kind of, in part, was most interested by what the brother had to say about what was actually going on in the house, and that he believes all of this was a bunch of nonsense. And again, I believe in this kind of stuff for the most part, but demonic possession is kind of where I'm like, me personally, which is just me, I'm like, man, really? Is it that really? Okay. To me, it sounds more like the power of suggestion, especially if you're dealing with an undiagnosed mental health issue in a person. The power of suggestion in that person can probably be pretty strong, and you can probably very easily influence that kind of mind. But maybe David Glatzel truly believed that this was happening to him. Maybe he didn't know any better. Maybe this undiagnosed mental health issue fooled him too. I'm not saying he sat there and deliberately faked it. He may truly believe that this was happening to him. And again, maybe it was truly happening to him. I think that all just kind of depends on you and how you think about this kind of stuff. But what gets lost in all of it is that there is a dead person here. A person was murdered. Alan Bono was not exactly, from what I can read, like not the perfect person. He had his flaws like the rest of us do, but he didn't deserve what happened to him, to get multiple stab wounds to his chest and die this kind of slow, painful death. Unfortunately, he gets lost in all of it. Even in the movie The Conjuring 3, he's just sort of there as this caricature. They don't really flesh out that character. It's just, oh, there's a guy here, we need him there to stab him to make the story, whatever. Like, he is the main victim in all of this, and he is just painted as he's just the victim in the movie. I don't really know much about the guy. There really isn't much about him, because most of the story, most of everything involved with this case focuses so heavily on the Glatzel family and Arnie Johnson, the killer. And no one seems to focus in on who was Alan Bono. I know that he was a person who didn't deserve to die the way he died. And in the end, Arnie Johnson spent 5 years in prison for killing him. And if you don't believe the devil/demon theory, then Alan Bono didn't get the justice he deserved. He didn't. 5 years? But if you believe the devil made him do it, well, who do you put in prison for that? I mean, what are you going to go down to hell and take Beelzebub in handcuffs, throw him in a prison cell? He'll just get right out. He's like magic or something. I don't even know. But this story is just wild. It's crazy. It's insane. Scary. It's a lot of things. A convoluted mess. And it's like, are they glorifying this man's death for this ghost story, right? Is he is he nothing more than a placemat? Whatever the term is, a placeholder to throw this crazy story around. All I know is that Alan Bono was stabbed to death. Whoever you feel needs to pay for what they did to him, regardless, Alan Bono did not get the justice he rightfully deserved. But that is actually it for this case. True crime, Maroony Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. Hope you found it interesting. Please make sure you hit that like button, you smash it with your foreheads, and you ring that bell for notifications, because if you don't,
I will eat your mother soul, and I will twist your necks around and eat the insides of your body. I will eat the bones from inside of you, and I will suck them dry, suck them clean.
I'm not entirely sure what happened there. But anyway, toodles! Her neighbors would hear blood-curdling screams coming from the parking lot. What they didn't realize was that they were listening to her being abducted. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Juli Buskin. Viewer discretion is advised. Jewel Jean Buskin, who would actually go by Juli to everyone. She was born on October 24th, 1975, and she was raised in Benton, Arkansas. She graduated from Benton High School there in Arkansas in 1993, and she had dreams and aspirations of one day becoming a professional dancer, in particular a ballerina. She would end up attending the Oklahoma College of Fine Arts and was a member of the Oklahoma University Dance School. And Juli was an absolutely fantastic dancer. She caught on to it really quickly. She was graceful. She was beautiful. She loved to put her blood, sweat, and tears into this. She loved to practice every single day. One of her proudest moments was performing in the show Swan Lake. And not only did she get along with every single person that she danced with, she also had a humongous group of friends outside of all of that. She got along with everybody. She was really well liked. She was extremely popular. So in the winter of 1996, Juli had graduated from the dance school. And since she had done that, she was going to be moving back home with her family in Arkansas. And then the plan there was to enroll in graduate school, and she wanted to earn her teaching degree because her ultimate goal was to open up her own dance studio and teach children how to dance. She wanted to teach ballet. And so her parents had already arranged to pick up a U-Haul and drive from Arkansas to her apartment there in Oklahoma, pack up all of her things, and bring her home. And on December 20th, 1996, that's exactly what they did. But when her parents arrived, they found out something quite alarming. Their daughter Juli was now missing. She was not in her apartment. What they learned was that she was last seen by her friends on the night of December 19th, 1996. Juli had hung out with some friends, and then she was going to drop one of her friends off at the Will Rogers Airport, which she did. She was definitely observed doing it. Her friend could confirm she dropped her off, and that was the last time anyone actually saw Juli, any one of her friends or family, ever again. And then at about 5:30 a.m., now on December 20th, the morning of December 20th, there would be 911 calls, a couple calls made to police with regards to the sounds of someone screaming in the parking lot.
911? Yes, we were just sleeping, and my wife heard a really strange, like a really awful scream from our parking lot of our apartment complex.
Do you see anything outside?
No, I'm kind of afraid to go outside, actually.
They also happened to have an off-duty police officer who doubled as a security guard at that apartment complex that Juli lived in, and he was informed about these screams. He went to check out where the screams are coming from, but he didn't see anything. He didn't hear anything. One witness said not only did they hear the sound of a woman screaming, but they also heard a man screaming, "Shut up and get in the car." And then another witness heard a car speeding out of the parking lot. Now, later that afternoon, a close friend of Juli's would go to her apartment to check on her to see if, she was ready for her to do something that they were going to be doing, and she didn't answer the door. He also noticed that her car was missing from its normal parking spot there. So he just kind of assumed that, she was out doing something, but she would be home soon. So he tries again later, and still, she's not answering her door, and her car is still not there. And so the friend would reach out to other friends, and I think some of Juli's family members who may have been nearby, and none of them had seen her, none of them had heard from her. So at that point, they report her missing. And it just so happens to be later on that evening when Juli's parents arrive in Oklahoma with the U-Haul when they find out that their daughter is missing. Then they found out about this sound of a female screaming in the parking lot, and a car speeding away, and a man saying to shut up and get in the car. And now Juli's car is missing, as well as Juli. Coinciding with all of that, right around, I think it's the same day, or maybe the next day, there is a man who is driving past, I guess, Lake Stanley Draper, and he sees what looks like someone lying on the ground on the bank of the river. And he doesn't really think much of it. Then he goes home, but it's been bothering him, and he says, you know what, I got to go back and see what that was. He goes back with his wife, and they get closer to person they saw lying on the ground, and that person is still there. And at that point, they realized this person is dead, and it was the body of a female. When police arrive, they, get a good look at the victim. She had been shot to death. She was lying on her stomach. Her hands were bound behind her back. She was fully clothed. However, her jeans were unbuttoned and unzipped. And I guess her underwear had been somewhat rolled down a little bit. And then with the missing persons report being filed about Juli and then them finding this body pretty much coinciding together, they were able to very quickly determine that this was, in fact, the body of Juli Buskin. Juli was just 21 years old. The coroner determined that Juli had been shot execution style in the back of her head. The gun had been pressed directly against her skin. That's how close it was when it was fired. They also determined that Juli had been sexually assaulted. And lying a few feet away from where her body was a pink leotard. And that pink leotard was later determined to belong to Juli. On that leotard was seminal fluid, male bodily fluid. The police also found several footprints, shoe impressions in the red sand near her body. And her shoes were still on, and they determined that some of the shoe impressions were from her, but there were other shoe impressions which were a size 9, a men's size 9, were found that were obviously not matching her shoe impression. So they believe that those shoe impressions came from her killer. And they would determine that the shoe impressions were made by a size 9 Nike shoe, specifically the Nike Air 2s. The following day, Juli's vehicle was actually found, and it was in the parking lot, not of her apartment complex, but in an apartment complex across the street. The vehicle, a red Summit Eagle, was completely intact. There was no broken windows. There was no forced entry in the vehicle. They dusted the entire car for fingerprints. They actually found none. There was no blood in the car, no hair samples. There was really no forensic evidence other than a little tiny amount of red sand, which they would later discover was the exact same red sand found where her body was found. Inside the car, no sign of a struggle, nothing appeared to be stolen, so they really didn't get a lot of forensic evidence from it other than that sand. Two things were missing from Juli. Her cell phone was missing, and her ring that she always wore was missing. Now, with her cell phone being missing, they were able to look to her phone records, and a phone call was made from Juli's phone, which would have happened after she had been murdered. It was used twice. One to, I guess, call some number to check the weather forecast, but also it was used to call a number that was out of service. So that really led them nowhere at that point. The DNA that they had collected had not matched anyone specifically at that point. Detectives would interview all the people who had called 911 that night. They also had interviewed everyone at the apartment complex that they could. And while other people heard the screams and had called 911 when they heard it, thankfully, no one actually reported to really seeing anything significant in terms of Juli being kidnapped from her apartment or from outside of her car. They did hear a car speeding away, which they believe had to have been Juli's car at that point being driven by her kidnapper. So she would have been able to have gotten home from the airport by about 5:30 a.m. when those screams were heard. So what they think happened was that she had parked her car, she had gotten out, and then she was accosted by her would-be assailant. Kidnapped, thrown into her own vehicle, driven to the location where she was found, and then raped and murdered. About a month goes by when police get a tip from a man who calls in and says that on the night of Juli's murder, he saw a man driving that red vehicle away from the area of the lake where Juli's body was found. And apparently this guy got a pretty good look at the man, and he would come up with a composite drawing. And this sketch here is one of the two different sketches made of who this man what he may have looked like. Even after putting that photo out there on the news and the newspapers, nobody recognized him. Then her case goes cold, and for about 4.5 years, they really don't get anywhere until someone who had, I guess, been at a local jail came to police 4.5 years after the murder, and she said that she recognized the sketch of that man from earlier matching a man she saw at this local jail. The man, his name was Dennis. He was a construction worker who lived within a couple of blocks of Juli. When police found this guy, they asked him questions. He denied having anything to do with the murder. They asked him, "Are you willing to give your DNA?" He says no. He won't take a polygraph test. He won't do anything. He does have a resemblance to one of the sketches that was made, but eventually they were able to get a court order to get his DNA, which he then provides because he has to. And that DNA was not a match from the DNA found at the crime scene, so he was ruled out. 6 years after Juli is murdered, another suspect comes into view. A man named Anthony Sanchez had been arrested 6 or so years after Juli's murder, and he was arrested for the rape of his own girlfriend. And when he was arrested and charged with rape, he had to surrender his DNA. And so police were just curious, like, this might be the guy, this might be him, given that he was now being arrested for rape in the same area. And so they take his DNA and they are going to try to match it up with the DNA found with Juli. That's going to take some time. But they begin to look into this guy, and they discover that one of his former girlfriends kept a diary, and in that diary she noted that Anthony had purchased a pair of sneakers for her, and then he himself purchased the same sneakers in a size 9, and they were Air 2 Nikes. They did confirm that Anthony Sanchez wore a size 9, which would match the size of shoe impressions found at the crime scene. Juli had also been shot with a .22 caliber weapon, which they had one of the bullets. The bullets had, I guess, some rare striations on them that wasn't super common. And looking into Anthony Sanchez, they also found out through one of his former girlfriends that he and his dad, for whatever reason, used to take .22 caliber guns and shoot them into their walls. So police get a warrant to search the home Anthony was living in. They bring in radar, they begin knocking down walls to see if they can find any bullets, to see if they can match it to the ones found with Juli, but they have no luck. But then a couple of days later, I guess the landlord who is cleaning up after all of this attempt to collect evidence, he finds a small .22 caliber bullet. And so they take that bullet and they match it with the bullet found with Juli. They line it up with the microscope and it is pretty much a match. It's the same bullet, or the same type of bullet, fired from the same gun. And then they finally get the results of the DNA test. And Anthony Sanchez, it is confirmed. It was his DNA, his seminal fluid found on that leotard found next to Juli's body. When confronted, he completely denies it. He says, "I don't even know her," which is true. He didn't. They didn't know each other whatsoever. But all he really said was, "I didn't do it. My DNA matches. Great. It wasn't me." Well, it's difficult to refute science. So he had a history of breaking and entering. He had a history of robbery, not also to go along with his history of sexual assault and rape, but he was known to be a thief, and he had been arrested for it before. So what they think happened, because this was December 20th, Christmas was just a couple days away, they think he was stalking apartment complex, parking lots and looking inside vehicles to see if people had any Christmas presents in their cars. And he was likely doing that when Juli pulled into her parking spot when he noticed her. And then he decided right then and there, I'm going to kidnap her, and I'm going to rape her, and I'm going to kill her. And then he runs up to her, and he tries to kidnap her, and that's when they hear the screams. Then they hear the guy saying, "Get in the car," and then they hear the sound of the car driving away. It all kind of lines up. They don't have the shoes anymore, however. They never found those shoes. I don't think they ever found the gun either, but they did have that bullet evidence. They had the DNA. They had the fact circumstantially that he did wear the same size shoe, and there was records of him purchasing those shoes. So he was arrested and formally charged with the murder of Juli. And in 2006, he goes on trial, and the evidence is pretty overwhelming. Now, I want to say during the trial, there was a point where he actually tried to suggest that it wasn't his DNA, it was probably his dad's DNA, I guess as a Hail Mary. They do a test then and determine that the DNA was not his father's. So he's trying to throw his own dad under the bus. But at any rate, Anthony is then convicted of the murder and he's sentenced to death. In 2009, he tries to appeal the conviction and he loses. He then tries to say, as another Hail Mary before his execution date, that once again, it's his father who did it. It's his DNA. And he's saying that his dad confessed to the rape and murder of Juli. And then a girlfriend of Anthony's dad also said that he confessed to it. But conveniently, they're saying this confession happened. They're not coming forward to police until after Anthony's father had killed himself. So he was dead. Then they came out and said that he confessed. Convenient. And even though they had that evidence at the trial before, that they tried to match it up with his dad and they had no luck, they once again said, okay, we'll test the DNA again. And now the DNA testing, because this is years has gone by now, that DNA testing is more advanced, and they're able to 100% say it was not his father's DNA. It was Anthony's DNA, specifically 100% his DNA. And so once again, his appeal was denied. And then in September of 2023, the then 44-year-old Anthony Sanchez is out of appeals. He has exhausted everything. He still denies that he had anything to do with it, but he is strapped to a table and he is executed by lethal injection. And this was all despite there were a lot of protesters protesting his execution, saying they're executing an innocent man. But this is a case where the DNA is completely, it's accurate. And they're trying to say that, oh, the DNA must have been contaminated in some way. But they ran that test a bunch of times, and it always came back to him. And it's important to note that he repeatedly denied having even met Juli, but his DNA puts him literally with her body. And so they got the correct guy. I mean, this was her killer. This was her rapist, her kidnapper, and her killer. This is a case where they did their homework, they did well, they investigated this, and they got the right guy. And so in the end, 21-year-old Juli Buskin got the justice she rightfully deserved. This is a wild story of one man who would leave multiple bodies in his path. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Adam and Samantha Crismer. Viewer discretion is advised. Adam Crismer was born on August 25th, 1985 in Walker County, Georgia. Samantha Lemming Crismer, she was born on April 21st, 1986, also in the Walker County, Georgia area. Adam and Samantha would eventually meet in, I think, 2002 while both attending Ridgeland High School in Rossville, Georgia. Rossville is considered to be like a very rural, very kind of desolate, small town type place. The population there is literally like 4,000, maybe a little bit less. So it's one of those communities basically where everyone knows everyone. I've talked about a lot of these types of communities. Seems things like this happen in those areas a lot. From what I understand, Rossville, I guess, bleeds a little bit into the Chattanooga, Tennessee area. I guess they're like right on the state lines there. So like Rossville kind of takes up two states. In 2002, Adam was a 17-year-old and Samantha was 16 years old. Everybody who knew them described them as being madly in love with each other. Samantha was just crazy for Adam. Adam was someone, even at a young age, who just took really good care of Samantha. He truly loved her. Adam was the youngest of 4 kids. He had 2 brothers and a sister. Adam was really, really into art, and it was said that he was someone who had a ton of talent artistically. His family described him as a super loving, very kind young man. And he also loved to make people laugh. He would do like Jim Carrey impressions for people, and that always got people to smile. But by August of 2002, Adam had just dropped out of high school. And in August of 2002 is when he would end up marrying his 16-year-old girlfriend, Samantha. There were rumors that the only way they were allowed to get married was that Samantha had to fake a pregnancy in order to essentially get married as minors, because they were both minors and they would need either parental consent or proof that Samantha was pregnant. So the rumor is that she may have used someone else's urine, a friend of hers or a sister or something like that was pregnant, in order to basically trick them into thinking she was pregnant. However, this is an unconfirmed rumor. It's alleged, again, unconfirmed rumors, but it's alleged that Samantha did have some connections to some, like, I guess, lesser gangs in the area, and that she did have some involvement with drugs, such as cocaine. And then eventually Adam would become involved in the drug scene as well. Samantha was one of 5 kids. She had 2 step-siblings. Her mom described her as a very beautiful, very lovely young woman who could have done so much with her life if she was allowed to continue living. Samantha had a huge personality, but a very welcoming personality, very funny, very outgoing, very kind, and she always wanted to help people whenever she could, if she could. She had dreams of becoming a veterinarian at some point, possibly even a lawyer down the road. But she really had a passion and a love for animals. Despite rumors of, possible gang involvement and drug involvement, at the same time, no one really ever had any ill will towards Samantha. She was still respected by her peers and just well loved by all of them. When she met Adam while both attending high school in 2002, she instantly fell in love. It was like love at first sight. And then, of course, like I said, they would get married eventually. The 2 of them had made friends because of a mutual friend or a sibling. I can't exactly say for sure what, but they made friends with another teenager who also attended Ridgeland High School, and her name was Kelly Willis. Kelly's dad was a man named Howard Hawk Willis. Shortly before this case kind of starts, Howard Hawk Willis is married to a woman named Wilda Gad Willis. Wilda was not his first wife, no. He had previously been married to Nancy Deborah Willis. She would go by Debbie to most people, but other people would still call her Nancy. From what I understand, Nancy did have 2 children of her own, but I don't know for sure if both of those children were from Howard or if one of them was. It's kind of unclear. But on December 23rd, 1986, Nancy had just left her family's home, visiting them for the holidays, and her family lived in Gate City, Virginia. She left their house that December 23rd on her way back home, and home for her at the time was Ringgold, Georgia. Her and Howard were in the process of building a home in Tennessee. So anyway, her family had last seen her on December 23rd. And then after that, no one can say they ever saw Nancy again. None of her friends or other family members. They hadn't heard from her. They had not seen her. She just seemed to vanish. But the thing is because most of her family lived in Virginia and she lived in the Georgia area, there wasn't necessarily everyday contact. So the family didn't truly realize that Nancy was missing or that something was amiss until several months later. So they finally reported her missing, and then police got involved there in the Georgia-Tennessee area. So when police got to Howard Willis to question him about it, he said the last time he saw Nancy was March 11th, 1987. He said that Nancy said she was leaving him, that she wanted a divorce, so she was booking it. And so he, I guess, willingly took her to the bus station and dropped her off. And then from there, he never saw or heard from her again. But police could never find Nancy. They never knew where she was supposedly going, if you're believing Howard's story. They never found any proof of bus tickets. They never found evidence of her trying to leave, anything. They didn't find anything. They could not find any signs of foul play. They had no evidence to suggest that Howard may have done something to her. There was nothing. So the case of her disappearance went cold very quickly, and there was just always suspicion that Howard had involvement in the disappearance, but they couldn't prove it. I don't know if that house they were building ever got built, but Howard did eventually move to the Tennessee part of town with, his kids, and then eventually, because he had his own children as well, and eventually his new wife, Wilda. And then one of his daughters, Kelly, would meet Samantha. The two of them became good friends. And eventually Samantha would move in with Kelly on Howard's property. And then eventually Adam, once they got married, would move in with Samantha into, I guess, a trailer on Howard's property. Soon after this, Wilda would actually file for divorce with Howard. And she wanted out of this relationship. And she had told Howard he needed to get all of these teenagers off of the property because Howard would allegedly hang out with Kelly and her teenage friends, and he would party with them, drink with them, allegedly do drugs with them. And Will was like, you gotta stop this. You gotta end it. But he didn't. By the way, did Samantha and Adam's parents allow Samantha and Adam to move in on this property? Or what was their opinions on that? I'm not 100% sure, to be honest with you. The last bit of background I do have on all of the players involved here. In the year 2000, Howard was busted. He was busted trying to transport cocaine from Texas to New York. I believe he got caught in New York. So he was arrested and he was charged with various charges to do with that. And they did let him out on bail, and the authorities in New York gave him permission to move back to Tennessee and stay there while he was on bail awaiting his trial. A lot of background and a lot of people I know involved in this one. It's kind of a wild one. On around September 24th, 2002, Samantha, she had a dog. She would bring the dog into the vet for a routine, checkup. One of those drop-off appointments, so Samantha dropped the dog off and then would leave and do some stuff. However, Samantha never returned to pick up the dog. And I guess this may have had something to do with the fact that whatever the dog may have needed something to be taken care of, and Samantha maybe could not have afforded it. And so at some point they boarded the dog, or from what I've read in other places, the veterinarian actually ended up taking the dog themselves to take care of. I'm not positive on this, but Samantha never got back to the vet. But Samantha didn't fall off the face of the earth. She was still seen by many, many people. This was a matter of not being able to, take care of the situation financially. Fast forward a couple of weeks to October 4th, 2002. Samantha was just out having lunch with her mom when Adam came into the restaurant they were at and interrupted the lunch. Adam told Samantha, hey, we're going to go pick up the dog from, the boarding place. Howard's going to take us. With Adam was their friend Kelly. She also came into the restaurant. I don't know 100% what the argument was about, but apparently Kelly and Samantha got into some kind of argument there where Samantha called Kelly a bitch, out loud. But apparently they quickly made up because Samantha, Adam, and Kelly would then leave the restaurant, and Samantha's mom saw the three of them get into a red Jeep, and she saw Howard Hawk Willis driving that Jeep, and then she saw them drive away. That would be the last time that Samantha's mom would ever see Samantha again. Later that same night on October 4th, 2002, Adam would call his mom, and Adam was apparently crying. He was distraught, and he told his mom, I want to move back home. I want to stop doing all of this. And so the conversation ended, and that was the last time that Adam's mom would ever hear from him again. And from that point moving forward, no one would ever see Adam or Samantha alive again. That exact same evening, police had called Howard Willis because they wanted him to come into the station to answer some questions about another disappearance. So not about his ex-wife, Nancy. No, this was about his stepfather, who, around September 24th or so, just a few weeks prior, he had just up and vanished. His name was Sam Thomas. On the phone, they told Howard, we want to talk to you about some CCTV footage we have. We found an image that you and then your two acquaintances, Adam and Samantha Chrismer, we saw you on camera using Sam Thomas's credit cards after he was missing. And so we want you to come down and talk to us about that. So eventually they would agree that on October 8th, that Howard would come in and talk to them. Police did feel a little concerned that Howard would maybe try to run after this conversation. Maybe he would try to flee. So what they did was they contacted the authorities in New York. They told them the situation. And the New York authorities, they put out a warrant for Howard's arrest. And basically it's because they revoked his bail. This wasn't going to be like an immediate arrest. They basically had to go down there themselves and do all that. So it would be a few days before that official arrest could be made. On October 7th, police would call Adam's mom, and that's because they were trying to track down Adam because they wanted to interview Adam and Samantha, but they couldn't find them. And this, of course, was in regards to the credit card usage of the missing man. She told police that, well, I'm a little concerned now because I haven't heard from my son since October 4th, a few days ago. I haven't seen him, haven't talked to him. Samantha's parents, her mom, said the same thing. I haven't seen or heard from her since October 4th. On October 8th, Howard would actually go into the police station as promised, and he would talk to them. So they kind of actually went first into, hey, have you seen Samantha or Adam Chrismer? Because they're now missing. We want to talk to them as well about this, but now we can't find them. He told them, last time I saw either of them was on October 4th. And because police didn't have any actual physical evidence to connect him to the actual disappearance of Sam Thomas or any physical evidence with connections to any wrongdoings towards Samantha and Adam, they had to let him go because that warrant from New York hadn't taken effect yet. On October 11th, Adam's mom gets a phone call from Adam's cell phone. But it's not Adam that's on the other end. It's Howard. She asked him, where's Adam? We haven't seen or heard from him, and now you're calling us from his phone. Where is he? And he told her, I have no idea. He just left his phone here. I don't know what he called her about, what the goal was there, but Adam's mom, Samantha's mom, Tennessee police at this point now have pretty big suspicions that Howard Willis had something to do with the disappearance now of Adam and Samantha. Later that same day, on October 11th, the New York police would finally put that arrest warrant into play, and Howard was arrested, and he was brought back to New York. Also on October 11th, this was a very eventful day, and this was a very grim discovery. A man was fishing on Boone Lake, and I guess this lake is near Winged Deer Park. So he was fishing, and he all of a sudden saw something kind of float up in the water. Maybe a mannequin's head or something. But when he got closer, he realized that's an actual human head. There was a decapitated head in the lake. He calls police immediately. Police come and collect the remains. Before they can even really start searching the area for more parts, another person is fishing on the same lake in a different location, and they find a severed hand float up in the lake. And then a couple other people are walking around the lake. They find another hand, and they find a piece of human skull. Police collect all of this, and they're working on trying to identify who all these remains belong to. As this is going on, Howard's now officially in New York, and he has phone calls with his mother, Betty Willis. Her name, I guess, was Emma, but she went by Betty. Those phone calls, they're recorded. And on those phone calls, they have interactions where Betty is asking Howard, what do you want me to do about the storage room? There's a horrible smell coming from the storage. What do I do about the smell in the house? And then Howard's telling Betty on the phone, shut up, stop talking about that, because he probably realizes they're being recorded. Well, police get a hold of those phone calls, and they track down, through their investigation, the storage facility that Betty was probably referring to. They found that she took out a storage room. It was in her name and I guess her sister's name, Marie, I believe. And so the police get to that storage facility. And when they get to the storage room that they had rented, there was this horrific odor of decay coming from it. There were maggots literally crawling from underneath the door of the storage room. And they finally break the padlock and they get the door open, and it smells like, just death. In the storage room, they find two very large bins with blue lids. There is a tarp covering both of these bins. They remove the tarp and they open up the bins, and inside they find a body in each one. There is a female body in one of the bins. Her hands were tied behind her back, and in that bin was a bunch of clothing items and carpet pieces, just a bunch of stuff in there with her. The other bin had a dismembered body. That body was missing its head and its hands, but eventually they realized that the head and the hands and the piece of skull they found at the lake was a part of this particular body. Eventually, through dental records primarily, because both bodies were in decay, but both bodies would be identified as belonging to 17-year-old Adam Chrismer and 16-year-old Samantha Chrismer. Police take a whole bunch of evidence from the storage facility. They dust for fingerprints, and on the blue tarp, and I think also on the little bins that the bodies were in, they found fingerprints, and those fingerprints would come back to matching that of Howard Willis. At the autopsy, just to reiterate, Samantha's body was still, had her hands tied behind her back, and there were these zip ties tied around her wrists. There was a significant amount of bruising on her wrists and arms and all over her body, which suggested that she was likely beat for some time. She had teeth knocked out of her mouth. Her cause of death, though, was 2 gunshot wounds to her head, basically execution style. Adam's body was the one that was dismembered. They determined that a chainsaw was used to cut up Adam's body, and it appeared that Adam had been wrapped up in clothing or some kind of blanket or something, and that when he was dismembered, whoever did it dismembered him through those clothing items. Ultimately, his cause of death was also a gunshot wound to the front of his face that went through his chin and kind of out the back of his head. They did, however, find bullets with the bodies. So with each body, they did find fly larvae with them. And through the wonderful work of very smart scientists who know way more than I do, they were able to determine the time of death-ish because of those larvae found with the bodies. And they determined that Adam was likely killed sometime on October 4th, possibly October 5th. And that Samantha was killed possibly on October 6th, maybe October 7th, which means that Adam was probably killed the day he went missing. And then Samantha was held hostage, kidnapped, whatever the case may be, however you want to call it, and then tortured, and then later shot dead. Police would get a warrant to search Betty Willis's house. This is, again, the mom of Howard Willis. When they get in the house, they do have this big kind of smell of bleach, but also human decay. They see that pieces of carpet have been cut out of the floor, and it seemed the carpet would match some of the carpet pieces found in the bins with the bodies. But they also found locations on the carpet and the floor of the kitchen and stuff where there was very obviously someone had cleaned up something with bleach. There were smears of bleach. They did take carpet fibers, and eventually through forensics, they matched the carpet fibers from the house exactly to the carpet fibers that were found on the carpet pieces with the bins. There was also a pillowcase in one of the bins with the bodies, and when they got to one of the bedrooms, there was a pillow that was missing its pillowcase. The other pillowcases there at the house were the exact same type found with the bodies. In fact, there were several fibers found in the house that matched the fibers of various clothing products found with the bodies. So there was a lot of evidence to prove that those bodies came from that house, Betty Willis's house. Out in the backyard, kind of in some overgrown grass, they found a chainsaw. That chainsaw had a bunch of like fiber and thick clothing or blanket pieces stuck in the blades. And also in the blades was a whole bunch of like tiny pieces of dried blood, sort of kind of mixed in with the blades and the clothing. The clothing pieces they found stuck to the blades were the precise clothing items that Adam was wearing, meaning that they can confirm that this chainsaw cut through the fabric that was wrapped around Adam. So that chainsaw, plus the blood fragments they found, they could not match definitively to Adam or anyone because they were so degraded. But it was human blood they found. So they were able to determine that this was the chainsaw that was used to dismember Adam Christmer. They found zip ties in the house that were the exact same zip ties that were used to bound Samantha's wrists. They found black nylon rope in the house that was the exact same black nylon rope that was used to wrap around Adam's body with the clothing item. Also in the backyard of Betty's house, they find a gun just laying there in the grass. And around the gun are bullets. They take the bullets found there and they line them up with the bullets found with the bodies, and they were exact matches. And they were able to determine through firing tests that was the gun that fired the exact bullets that were found with the bodies that ended the lives of both Adam and Samantha. This was the murder weapon. At the house itself, they did not find any other traces of blood, which means that, Betty and likely Howard did a really, really good job, unfortunately, of cleaning up any large amounts of blood. There is a part of the house that seemed a little ransacked, a little messy with like ropes kind of on the floor, but they determined that this was like the likely area where at least Samantha was probably bound and eventually killed. But at this point, they have a shit ton of evidence connecting either Betty and or Howard to the murders of Samantha and Adam. But they can't exactly pin it on a specific person, not yet. What police believe happened was that on October 4th, Howard was called by police because they wanted to ask him about the missing man, Sam Thomas. And they wanted to talk to him about why he, Samantha, and Adam were using the missing man's credit cards. So they think Howard probably panicked, got concerned that Adam and Samantha were going to rat him out and talk. So he felt the need to kill them both and hide them so that no one could ever ask them about what happened. So while they believe it was Howard who pulled the trigger and not Betty, they still needed to prove it. And that would actually come pretty soon. If you remember, I talked about his ex-wife now, Wilda Gadd. And little did Howard know that when he was rearrested and brought back to New York, police had already been in contact with Wilda Gadd, his ex-wife. And they asked her if she would be willing to wear a wire and talk to him about possibly, missing Sam Thomas. And so she did. She wore a wire and she would visit Howard in prison there in New York. She, after many conversations, she asked him, "What did you do? What did you do to those two teenagers?" And so he said, quote, "I shot them. I shot Adam, and then eventually I shot Sam." And in this case, he's referring to Samantha. He said, quote, "I blew their brains out. I just pulled the trigger right then and there." Wilda asks him, "Why did you do it?" And all he said was, quote, "I don't know, Wilda. I just don't know." Wilda would then tell police that she is pretty confident that Howard murdered his previous wife, Nancy, and hid her somewhere. But even with that, police weren't ever able to connect him directly, physically at least, to the disappearance and or murder of his first wife. Wilda did also say that she is pretty confident that Howard killed Sam Thomas, and police were pretty confident of that as well. Wilda, however, did actually have an idea of where Howard may have buried Sam, and so she brought him to that location, and sure enough, they find a human body missing its head. But they were able to confirm through DNA testing and all that this was the body of Sam Thomas, which was Howard's stepfather. When confronted with all of this evidence, Howard said, well, it was Adam and Samantha that killed Sam Thomas. And so I don't know what to tell you, but police never had proof of that. He then said, well, first it was a teenager who killed Adam and Samantha. I had nothing to do with any of it. Then he said his mom did it. He said, Betty, she killed Sam and Adam, throwing other people under the bus for a crime that pretty much he already confessed to committing. He didn't know his confession was recorded. He didn't know that until later. Howard Hawk Willis was charged with the murders of Adam and Samantha Christmer. He would go on trial in 2010. This is like 8 years after he was arrested. I don't know why it took that long, but it took that long. The jury saw images of the remains of Adam and Samantha, and I guess the jury members, some of them, got very, very ill when they saw them, and several of them began to cry. So they had to stop proceedings for a little bit of time for the jury to kind of recover, because that's how bad it was. That's how bad the images were. All of the physical evidence and his confession were all presented to the jury. And the jury was like, yeah, no, obviously he's guilty. On June 21st, 2010, Howard Hawk Willis was found guilty on all charges, including 2 charges of capital murder, and he would be sentenced to death. He would appeal over the years, and in 2019, he tried to appeal it under the idea that the confession he gave to his ex-wife, well, that should be thrown out because she was working with police and she didn't tell me. I didn't know she was working with police, and so that should be thrown out. The courts were like, what? No, you willingly offer the information. So she didn't coerce you into saying it. You just said it. So they threw out his appeal, and he wasn't allowed. As of this day, he is still awaiting his execution. Howard Willis was never charged with the murder of Sam Thomas. I'm not 100% sure why. It's likely because there wasn't enough physical evidence connecting him directly to it. I mean, they were pretty confident he did it. It was his ex-wife who told police where the body likely was. But even with that, they didn't have the actual physical, stuff to say, yep, Howard did this, unfortunately. To this very day, Nancy Willis's body has never been found. She has never been found alive. She has never been seen or heard from since. Police are pretty confident that Howard Willis killed her, but they have no evidence. And especially without a body, they can't do anything about it. So he has never been charged in connection with the disappearance of Nancy Willis. Howard's mother, Betty Willis, would also be charged with accessory charges, but she would never make it to trial because she passed away before any trial for her could begin. This was a wild one. This was a lot. There was a lot of people and things involved with this one, but I'm glad the monster was finally caught and put in prison. I wish he would be held accountable for, the murder of Sam Thomas. And why he did that, by the way, I don't know. Could have been for financial reasons, just to have his money, but there's not even really a motive kind of developed with why he did that. Why he made his ex-wife disappear, probably because of the divorce, maybe because she was trying to leave him and he didn't like that. It's unknown. At least he's being punished, and he is on death row, so he will meet his maker. But that is it for this super wild case, True Crimerers. Hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you have tripped, fallen, and stumbled your way into this video by accident, hi, I'm Mike. Oh, well, that was weird. I tell true crime stories a week here on YouTube. I also tell a few throughout the week on TikTok. Please give me a subscribe here. Give this video a like so it's pushed out to the YouTube world. If there's a case you want to see me cover, please email me at mikey@truecrimerer.com. That's also listed below and in my link tree in my case list. You can search for names on that list, and if you don't see the name you want me to cover, then just email me the name of the person, where it happened, when it happened, and eventually I will add it to my list. I pick my cases at random, so I don't know when I'll cover that case you recommend, but I will cover it eventually. But that is it for this video. True crime, a Rooney, a Dooney, a ding dong. And as I close every video, I'm going to try to eat this gummy bear wrapper and try to do it in less than 10 seconds. That was stupid of me to try. That was very dangerous. I could have died. You should have stopped me. You're not very good people. You would have let me die right there for your own amusement. You're disgusting. You're sick people. What's wrong with you? Go to HE double hockey sticks, you freaks. Molly just stole the wrapper. She stole it. Now she's eating it. Can you hear the crunch? Maybe not. Great. Now my dog's gonna be sick because of you people. I'm just kidding. Love you!